He thought his badge made him untouchable until the woman he pulled over showed up in court, wearing a uniform with more medals than he had years on the force. It started just after 11, Toledo, Ohio. The kind of hour when the roads are quiet, the storefronts dark, and only the hum of streetlights fills the gaps between buildings. A black government-issued SUV glided through the intersection of Monroe and Reynolds. Nothing flashy. Just clean, steady, and silent, like the woman driving it. Lieutenant Colonel Adrienne Wallace had been on the road for nearly 2 hours, coming back from a late meeting at the Indiana Guard Reserve. Her mind was already halfway home, her posture relaxed, eyes focused ahead, hands steady at 10 and 2. She wasn't speeding, wasn't weaving, just moving through the city she'd driven through a dozen times before. But to Sergeant Daniel Mercer, parked just off the road in a patrol cruiser sipping what was left of a lukewarm coffee, that SUV was something else. An unknown, a target, something to break the boredom of a dead shift. He didn't hesitate. Tossed the cup aside, flicked on the sirens. The blue and red lights lit up the night like a warning flare. Adrienne's eyes flicked to the rearview mirror, one breath in, no panic, no assumptions. She guided the SUV to the curb, signaled, and came to a complete stop. Her training kicked in before emotion could. Calm, controlled, predictable, the driver's side mirror reflected a tall figure stepping out of the patrol car. Fast, hard. Door slam loud. His flashlight beam cut through the window before she could even roll it down. He didn't come to the passenger side. He didn't announce himself. He went straight for her door, a voice, cold and clipped. License and registration. Adrienne kept both hands visible on the wheel, rolled the window halfway down. "Officer, may I ask why I'm being stopped?" The flashlight didn't waver. Mercer narrowed his eyes, aimed the beam straight into hers. "You were drifting, no signal, looked impaired." Her brow lifted. "I wasn't." "License and registration," he repeated, louder this time. No name, no explanation, no basic courtesy. She moved slowly, deliberately, opening the glove box, retrieving the documents with practiced care. "This is a government vehicle. I'm a federal employee," she said. He glanced at the ID, didn't react. "Military? Yes. Doesn't mean you're above the law. I never said I was." His hand shifted to rest near his holster. She noticed. He took one step closer. "Step out of the vehicle for me." Adrienne blinked. "Excuse me, step out." Sobriety check. Her jaw tensed, but her voice stayed measured. "On what grounds?" "I've complied. I haven't been drinking. I'd like to know the reason." He didn't like that. His voice hardened. "Now you're refusing a lawful order. I'm asking for clarification." That was enough for him. He reached for her door handle. "I need you to exit the vehicle now." She didn't flinch, didn't argue. She picked up her phone with her right hand, turned on the camera, and said evenly, "Just so we're clear, this interaction is being recorded." A flicker. His eyes dropped to the phone. One small crack in the armor, but not enough, not yet. Out of the car. Adrienne stepped out, her back straight, not aggressive, just firm. She didn't raise her voice, didn't resist, but the way she stood, calm, composed, shifted the energy. Even in civilian clothes, something about her presence made him pause, not visibly, but internally. A voice inside him whispered, "What am I dealing with?" He pushed it aside. Ego louder than instinct. He put her through a field test, flashlight in her eyes, walked the line, heel to toe, she passed. No stumble, no slur, no hesitation. Still, he wrote the ticket. Failure to maintain lane. Adrienne took it in silence, one look. That was all, no protest, no name drop, no mention of rank. She returned to her vehicle and drove off into the dark. Behind her, Mercer stood for a moment by the curb, ticket book in hand, convinced the night was over. He had no idea it had just begun. The break room smelled like burnt coffee and tired pride. The overhead lights buzzed faintly, flickering every few seconds, casting a sterile glow across the tile floor. It was past midnight at the West Toledo precinct, and the room held only 2 men, Sergeant Daniel Mercer and Officer Dyers, a young patrolman just finishing up paperwork from a slow night. Mercer leaned back in the plastic chair, boots crossed at the ankle, a half-eaten protein bar resting on the table beside him. He was grinning, reliving the moment like it was a story worth telling. She thought that little government badge was gonna get her out of a citation. he said, chuckling. Flashy SUV, tinted windows, that stiff posture, like I was supposed to salute her or something. Dyers didn't look up from his screen. Mercer went on, gave me that attitude right away. You know the type. Calm, like she's smarter than you, like she's testing you. I told her to step out. She blinked at me, so I opened the door for her. She didn't like that. Dyers tapped a few keys. Mercer didn't stop. Said she was military. Didn't say rank, just gave me a look like I was supposed to be impressed. I've seen it before. He took a bite of the bar, chewed slowly, swallowed. Reminds me of that punk kid last year, the one on Bancroft. Black teenager, maybe 16, gave me lip at a stoplight. I told him get out, get on his knees. Thought his mom was gonna have a heart attack, but he listened. They always do, eventually. Dyers finally glanced up. What was her name? The woman you pulled over? Mercer shrugged. Wallace, Adrienne Wallace. He said it like the name meant nothing, but Dyers stopped, blinked, then sat up straighter. Wallace. Adrienne Wallace. Mercer frowned. Yeah, why? Dyers leaned back, brow furrowed. She gave a lecture at the academy last spring. Logistics and command ethics. Full uniform, Bronze Star, 2 deployments. She's no small fry. Mercer scoffed. That's supposed to mean something to me. Dyers didn't answer right away, just looked at him quietly, like something unspoken had shifted. The air in the room felt heavier now. Mercer waved it off. Doesn't matter who she is. On the road, I'm the authority. That's how it works. You don't ask questions, you comply. Rank doesn't mean anything when you're behind the wheel at night. But the words didn't hit the same anymore. They landed flat. Even Mercer felt it. Dyers went back to typing, but slower this time, less engaged. The hum of the vending machine in the corner sounded louder than it had before. Mercer stood, stretched, tried to shake it off. She's just another driver, gave me attitude. Got a ticket, end of story, but he didn't believe it, not entirely, because the look on Dyers's face wasn't casual, it was caution, respect, maybe even a little fear. And Mercer, for the first time in a long time, felt something he didn't like. Not doubt, not guilt, but a whisper of uncertainty, a crack in the armor. He tossed his wrapper in the bin and walked out of the room. Dyers didn't say another word. The lights kept flickering overhead, but Mercer didn't notice. Not this time. The office was quiet, too quiet, the kind of silence that hums just beneath the surface of a sleepless night. Outside, Fort Wayne was still cloaked in darkness, the sun not even close to rising. Inside, the only sound was the steady drip of a coffee maker and the low hum of the base's HVAC. Lieutenant Colonel Adrienne Wallace sat at her desk, eyes fixed on the laptop screen, the cursor blinking at the end of a sentence she'd written and deleted 4 times. Her uniform jacket was draped over the back of her chair. Her blouse sleeves were rolled up. There was a fatigue in her shoulders, not from physical strain, but from the weight of restraint. She hadn't slept, not because she was angry, though she was, not because she was afraid, though she knew the stakes, but because the entire stop kept playing in her mind like a loop she couldn't turn off. The flashlight in her eyes, the dismissive tone, the way his hand hovered near his holster like she was a threat, and the way he looked at her, not like a person, not even like a problem, but like a target. Her aide, Sergeant Daniels, knocked lightly and stepped inside without waiting. He carried 2 mugs, one of them chipped on the rim. He set one down in front of her and studied her face. "Ma'am, you all right?" Adrienne didn't look up. "No," she said simply, "but I'm handling it." Daniels paused, nodded once. That was all he needed. He knew her well enough not to push. He backed out of the room and shut the door softly behind him. Adrienne exhaled through her nose, slow and deliberate. She opened her inbox, clicked new message. She didn't hesitate this time, no drafts, no second guessing. She typed quickly, methodically, attaching the video from her phone and linking the time-stamped body cam footage. 1 to the base legal team, 1 to the Inspector General's office, 1 to Internal Affairs Liaison for Joint Force Coordination. Her fingers moved with precision, no emotion, just process. She didn't write a narrative, she didn't make a speech, she wrote facts, exact times, exact words. She let the footage speak louder than she ever could. When she was done, she leaned back for the first time that morning, her spine stiff against the chair. She stared at the ceiling tiles, not for peace, just to remind herself she was still here. Still grounded. The room was still quiet, but it wasn't empty. It was full of restraint, of discipline, of years of knowing exactly how fast things could spiral if she let even one thread of emotion unravel in the wrong direction. Her phone buzzed once. A text, unknown number. The message was short. I saw the video. I remember you from the academy. He did the same thing to me. Thank you for not letting it go. Adrienne stared at it for a moment, thumb hovering over the screen. She didn't respond. She didn't need to. The message wasn't for her. It was for the girl who sent it. For the version of Adrienne who once thought staying silent was the safest thing. Not anymore, not this time. She turned back to the laptop, opened her calendar, and blocked off the next 4 days. Legal prep, review, coordination. Then she stood, smoothed her blouse, and reached for the uniform jacket. She didn't wear it that morning, not yet. This wasn't about image. This was about truth, quiet, documented, unshakable. Behind her, the coffee maker beeped twice, signaling the pot was ready. She didn't touch it. She had what she needed, and what came next wouldn't be loud. It would be precise, because Adrienne Wallace didn't believe in chaos. She believed in chain of command, in timelines, in receipts. And this time she had all three. The sky was heavy that morning. Low clouds hovered like they were waiting for something to break. Sergeant Daniel Mercer stood in the parking lot behind the West Toledo precinct, one hand in his pocket, the other holding a plain manila envelope. No return address on the front, just his name, typed clean across the center. He assumed it was another departmental memo, maybe a performance review or a notice about shift coverage. He tore the flap open with his thumb and pulled out the document, glancing at it with half interest, already thinking about breakfast. But then he stopped reading. His eyes froze on one line, notice to appear, plaintiff. Lieutenant Colonel Adrienne Wallace. Allegation, violation of civil rights, unlawful detainment, abuse of authority. Mercer stared at the paper, then let out a short laugh. Loud, dismissive, no way, this is a reach. She passed the test. I didn't arrest her. He folded the notice once, shoved it back into the envelope, and started walking toward the building. His boots hit the concrete a little faster than usual. He muttered under his breath as he pushed through the back entrance, heading toward his locker. But before he could take off his jacket, a voice cut through the hallway. Sergeant Mercer, Captain Reading wants to see you. Now, Mercer turned. Officer Riley stood just outside the operations room, eyes unreadable. Mercer nodded, forced a smirk, and headed down the corridor. His confidence hadn't cracked, not yet, but there was something else there now, an itch he couldn't name. Inside the office, Captain Reading sat behind his desk, blinds half closed, a thin folder open in front of him. He didn't say anything at first, just motioned for Mercer to close the door. Mercer did. Then sat down across from him, arms folded tight. What's this about? She's pressing charges. Reading didn't look up. He tapped the file once. There's a complaint, formal, with video. Mercer scoffed. Her phone, I already logged the body cam. Nothing happened. Reading looked at him now. No, 2 videos, hers and yours. Mercer's jaw clenched. I followed protocol. Reading leaned forward. Then why does the footage show you raising your voice before she even asked a question? Why does your hand rest on your weapon while she stands still? Why did you open her door without cause? Mercer blinked. Because she hesitated. No, she asked for clarification. That's not refusal. That's her right. Mercer didn't speak. Not immediately. His fingers drummed once against his thigh. She didn't tell me who she was, he said finally. And that's the problem, Reading replied. Because it shouldn't have mattered. You treated her like a suspect before you knew anything. And now? Now it's not just a complaint, it's a civil rights case. And it's got traction. Mercer's voice dropped. This won't stick. Reading's tone didn't change. Maybe, maybe not, but you're going to court. And if the footage leaks, if the papers run it, if the base gets involved. Mercer didn't answer. The silence was louder than denial. Captain Reading closed the file slowly. I've seen you talk down to people before, Dan. I've heard the tone, watched the body language. It's been whispered. It's been tolerated. But this time the camera's rolling. And she's not some rookie, she's a lieutenant colonel. And she brought receipts. For a long moment, Mercer just sat there, breathing, thinking, no smirk, no comeback, just stillness. The envelope burned in his coat pocket, heavier now than when he opened it. Outside, the clouds hadn't moved, but something inside him had, not enough to admit it, not enough to change, but enough to stay quiet. The preparation didn't happen in a courtroom. It happened in quiet rooms, behind closed doors, where the people who carried weight didn't need to raise their voices. At Fort Wayne, Lieutenant Colonel Adrienne Wallace sat across from her attorney, Delaney Price, in a small conference room just off the base legal wing. The table between them was clean except for a laptop, a legal pad, and the printed complaint. Delaney tapped a pen once, twice, before asking the question she'd been holding. "What are you hoping to get from this?" Adrienne didn't blink. "Not money," she said. "I want a record, something that can't be erased when the room goes quiet." Delaney nodded, not in surprise, but in respect. "Then let's build one they can't ignore." Adrienne laid out everything: the timeline, the footage, the citations that never should have existed. The moment the flashlight hit her face and the silence that followed, she didn't embellish, she didn't dramatize, she just listed, fact by fact, like a field report. When Delaney asked why she didn't mention her rank during the stop, Adrienne responded evenly, "Because my identity shouldn't be the thing that protects me. It should be the way I'm treated as a citizen, not a soldier." Meanwhile, across the city, Sergeant Mercer was pacing a different floor. The union office on Madison Avenue smelled like old coffee and old politics. He stood in front of his representative, a retired officer named Hal Benson, who had seen more disciplinary hearings than promotions. Mercer handed over the complaint, voice sharp. "This is overblown. You can get it tossed, right?" Benson read through it slowly. Then again, his lips pressed into a flat line. "You've got a problem, Dan. She's got the footage. And she's not some activist looking for attention. She's trained, she's measured, she's got the chain of command behind her." Mercer leaned in. "I just need it to go away. Talk to someone at the base. Call in a favor." Benson looked up. "Do you know who her old co is? She served under General Marks. That's not a door you knock on, that's a door that doesn't open." Still, Mercer tried. He sent 2 emails, made a phone call, got nothing back. One call was returned with a single sentence: "We have full confidence in Lieutenant Colonel Wallace's judgment." He didn't call again after that. Then the leak happened, not to the press, not to the public, just to a few inboxes across the precinct and base legal channels. An anonymous email, no signature, just a story about a different woman, different badge. Same tone, same Mercer, a courtroom hallway, a defense witness. A young black mother told to sit down and shut up when she asked where to wait. The message didn't accuse, it just described, and ended with one line: "That was the first time, now someone's fighting back." Back at Fort Wayne, Adrienne stood alone in her office. The blinds were half drawn, her uniform hung neatly on the coat rack, untouched since the stop. She didn't need it yet. Her strength didn't come from the medals. It came from the silence she refused to carry any longer. She took the printed copy of the formal complaint and slid it into a picture frame. There were no faces in the frame, no photos, just paper, a record, a statement. She grabbed a pen, wrote a line in small print at the bottom of the page, "For every quiet voice who chose to speak." Then she placed it on the shelf above her desk, not to show off, not for visitors, just for her. So she would never forget what this was really about. Not revenge, not pride, accountability on both sides of the badge. The courtroom was cold, not in temperature, but in tone. Clean walls, polished benches, a judge's seat raised slightly above the room like an invisible line no one could cross without truth. It was early, just after 8, and there were no cameras, no flashing headlines, no press conferences. But the room wasn't empty. Adrienne Wallace walked in through the main doors, back straight, wearing her full-service uniform. Her medals were aligned, her nameplate polished, her rank unmistakable. She didn't look around, didn't acknowledge the subtle gasps or quiet nods. She wasn't there for recognition. She was there for accountability. Mercer was already seated with his attorney, Charles Brenner, tapping his thumb against his knee in short, impatient bursts. He turned as she entered and his posture changed, just slightly, a pause in motion, a flicker in the eyes, like he'd expected someone else or hoped for it, but Adrienne didn't flinch. She stepped forward with the same calm precision she'd used leading convoys through enemy terrain. The clerk called the room to order. The judge, Cynthia Morales, took the bench, adjusted her glasses, and spoke clearly. This is a civil complaint filed by Lieutenant Colonel Adrienne Wallace against Sergeant Daniel Mercer. Allegations include unlawful detainment, intimidation, and violation of constitutional rights during a routine traffic stop. The first hour passed with procedural motions. Brenner objected to language in the filing. Delaney Price, Adrienne's attorney, countered with case precedent. The judge allowed the complaint to stand as written. Then came the evidence. 2 videos. One from Adrienne's phone, the other from Mercer's body cam. The lights dimmed slightly as the screen played the first clip. The courtroom didn't move. Adrienne's voice was calm, her hands visible, the flashlight in her face, the tone in Mercer's voice. The escalation, the silence that followed, then the second angle from Mercer's chest. It showed everything the first didn't: his posture, his hand drifting toward his weapon, his expression, the impatience, the authority unearned. When the lights came back up, the room was silent, not stunned, just heavy, like truth had dropped into the air and no one dared to move it. Delaney called Adrienne to the stand. She stood, straightened her collar, and walked forward. Swore the oath, took her seat. Delaney stepped in front of her. "Lieutenant Colonel, can you walk us through the night of the stop?" Adrienne spoke plainly. "I was driving home from a meeting at the Indiana Guard Reserve. It was around 11:15 p.m. I was not speeding. I was not impaired. I was stopped by Officer Mercer. He approached my vehicle without identifying himself. He accused me of drifting between lanes. I asked for clarification. He escalated. Ordered me out of the vehicle. When I asked why, he opened the door himself. Did you resist? No. Did you threaten him? No. Did you identify yourself? I informed him I was a federal employee driving a government vehicle. Did that change his tone? It did not." Delaney paused. "Why did you record the stop?" Adrienne's answer was quiet but clear. "Because I've lived long enough to know that silence isn't protection. I wanted an accurate record of what happened." The judge nodded slowly, writing something on her notepad. Then Brenner stood. The defense may cross. He approached the stand with the measured tone of someone trying to look reasonable. "Lieutenant Colonel Wallace, is it possible Officer Mercer was simply doing his job? He was conducting a field sobriety test, not placing you under arrest." Adrienne didn't blink. "I complied fully. I passed the test. I showed no signs of impairment." He continued. "But is it not within an officer's discretion to ensure the safety of the road?" Adrienne replied, "Discretion must be paired with discipline. That badge is not a license for ego, it's a responsibility." Brenner stiffened. "But you never identified your rank. How was he to know who you were?" Adrienne looked at him. "It shouldn't have mattered. I'm a citizen first. If I need my rank to be treated with respect, then the system's already failed." He turned away, frustrated. No further questions. Then Delaney called Mercer to the stand. He walked slowly, sat with the stiffness of a man used to control. Delaney didn't waste time. "Sergeant Mercer, why did you ask her to step out of the car?" She hesitated. "Did she refuse?" She asked a question. "Is that refusal?" "No." "Did she make any sudden moves?" "No." "Did she raise her voice?" "No." "So why did you escalate?" Mercer didn't answer. His jaw moved, but no words followed. Delaney leaned in. "Were you aware she was a lieutenant colonel?" Mercer said softly, "Not at the time. And if you had known, I probably would have handled it differently." The words hung in the air. The judge set down her pen. "Thank you, Sergeant." When he stepped down, Mercer's face was pale, not out of fear, but out of realization. Not only had he misjudged the woman that night, he'd underestimated the power of presence, of restraint, of preparation. The courtroom emptied slowly. No applause, no whispers. Just the sound of chairs sliding back and people stepping quietly into the hallway. Some were officers, some were soldiers. A few were civilians who had once sat across from Mercer in situations that never made it to court. But they came not for vengeance, but for truth. Adrienne gathered her papers, adjusted her collar, and walked out without a word. She hadn't raised her voice, She hadn't sought headlines, she had let the facts speak. And the silence around them was the loudest thing in the room. 1 week later, the courtroom was silent. The verdict had been handed down. The ruling was clear. The court found in favor of Lieutenant Colonel Adrienne Wallace. Violation of civil rights confirmed. Unlawful detainment. Abuse of authority. Mercer was placed on administrative leave. His badge suspended pending internal review. The case didn't make national headlines. There were no interviews. No press conferences. Adrienne turned them all down. When asked for comment, she said only this: the work speaks for itself. Back at Fort Wayne, the work continued. The same halls, the same routines, the same sense of purpose that had always driven her. But that morning, the air in the classroom felt different. It was a quiet space, tucked in the back of the training facility. 25 young soldiers sat at attention. Some barely out of high school, others fresh from basic. All of them with eyes forward, boots aligned, minds open. Adrienne stood at the front, no slides, no notes, just presence, just purpose. She looked around the room and asked one simple question: how many of you think your rank means you automatically deserve respect? A few hands went up, slowly, cautiously, some halfway, like the question itself carried a trap. Adrienne nodded. I understand. I used to think the same thing. She let the pause hang, the kind that pulls the room into stillness. Then she continued, but here's the truth. Respect isn't something you're owed. It's something you prove every day, every choice. Every moment you think no one's watching. She walked slowly across the room, not pacing, just shifting weight, keeping rhythm. That uniform you wear, the badge, the rank, the authority, it's not a shield, it's a weight. And if you can't carry it with discipline, you don't deserve to carry it at all. In the back, a recruit sat forward. He was young, eager, his eyes locked on hers like he'd never heard anyone say it that way. Adrienne stopped and looked right at him. When I was pulled over on a quiet road, I could have yelled, I could have panicked, I could have let it slide, but I didn't, because I knew that silence protects the wrong people, and courage protects the rest of us. Another pause. Deeper this time, heavy but clean. She walked back to the podium and rested one hand on the edge. That officer thought his badge made him untouchable, until he saw my rank, not just on my uniform, but in how I carried myself. That's the difference, that's leadership. No one moved, no one coughed. It wasn't fear, it was clarity. She closed the folder in front of her, though there was nothing inside it, just the motion of something ending, something complete. Lead with character, she said quietly, serve with integrity. And remember, when you wear this uniform, you don't just represent yourself. You represent everyone who came before you, and everyone who comes after. She didn't wait for applause, she didn't ask for thanks. She stepped down because the message had landed, not in noise, but in stillness, because sometimes the loudest voice is the one that never raised itself. If you enjoyed this story, let us know in the comments, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more inspiring stories.